You've spent years absorbing everyone else's pain. You became the therapist, the caregiver, the one who always understood. You abandoned yourself to survive, and now something inside you has finally had enough. Carl Jung understood this moment better than anyone. He called it the most dangerous transformation an empath will ever face. The moment you stop surviving and start returning to who you really are. Today, I'm going to walk you through the psychological process Jung documented in his most sensitive patients. Because what's happening to you right now isn't a breakdown. It's the beginning of your most powerful chapter. And Jung spent decades mapping exactly how this transformation unfolds. If you've ever felt like you've lost yourself while taking care of everyone else, this video will show you how to find your way back. Because the person you abandoned to survive is still there, waiting in your shadow. And Jung discovered that the return to self isn't just possible, it's inevitable once you understand the process. The empath's survival strategy starts in childhood. Jung documented this pattern across hundreds of patients. A highly sensitive child enters an environment that cannot hold their emotional intensity. Maybe the parents are emotionally unavailable, drowning in their own unprocessed trauma. Maybe the household is chaotic, filled with addiction or mental illness that nobody talks about. Or maybe the family system requires someone to absorb everyone else's dysfunction so the illusion of normalcy can be maintained. The sensitive child makes an unconscious calculation. They recognize that their authentic self threatens the stability of their attachment figures. A child who cries too much becomes a burden. A child who expresses anger gets punished. A child who has needs is told they're too demanding. So they do what all mammals do when attachment is threatened. They adapt. They trade authenticity for safety. They become whoever they need to be to maintain connection. Jung called this the development of the persona. But for empaths, the persona isn't just a social mask worn at work or in public. It becomes their entire identity, consuming every aspect of their being. They become the good one, the helper, the fixer, the therapist. They build their entire sense of self around meeting other people's needs, while their own authentic desires get buried deeper and deeper into the unconscious. This isn't a conscious choice. No 5-year-old sits down and decides to abandon themselves for the next 40 years. It happens automatically as a survival mechanism, encoded into their nervous system through thousands of small moments. The empath learns to read emotional atmospheres with extraordinary precision because their safety depends on it. They can walk into a room and within seconds know exactly who's angry, who's sad, who's about to explode. They develop the ability to sense what others need before those people even know it themselves. They become masters of anticipating and preventing conflict. They learn to shapeshift, becoming whoever the moment requires. With their anxious mother, they become calm and reassuring. With their angry father, they become invisible and compliant. With their depressed sibling, they become the source of all light and hope. But here's what makes this survival strategy so psychologically dangerous. Every time the empath suppresses their authentic response to please someone else, they push another piece of themselves into what Jung called the shadow. The real opinions they can't express, the anger they're not allowed to feel, the boundaries they're too afraid to set, the dreams they're not permitted to pursue. All of it gets rejected and buried in the unconscious. The persona grows stronger, while the authentic self grows weaker. Years pass, decades sometimes. The empath becomes an adult who genuinely doesn't know who they are anymore. They can tell you what everyone else needs, what everyone else feels, what everyone else wants, but they have no idea what they want. They can feel everyone else's emotions with perfect clarity, but they've lost contact with their own. Jung observed that empaths in this state don't experience themselves as people with needs. They experience themselves as functions. Their worth comes entirely from their usefulness to others. Remove that usefulness, and they face an existential crisis because there's no self underneath to fall back on. They are what they do for others, and nothing more. This creates what Jung called the persona trap. The empath has invested so much psychic energy into being perfect for others that they've imprisoned themselves inside an identity that doesn't reflect who they actually are. They're exhausted from holding up a mask that gets heavier every year. The weight of it crushes them slowly, but they're terrified to take it off because they don't know if there's anything underneath. What if I remove the mask and discover I'm nobody? What if the authentic self I'm searching for doesn't actually exist? The cost of this survival mechanism compounds over decades. The empath attracts relationships with people who need fixing because that's the only role they know how to play. It's not conscious. They're not deliberately seeking out narcissists and emotional vampires. But their energy signature broadcasts a message to the unconscious minds of takers everywhere. Here is someone who will absorb my dysfunction without complaint. Here is someone who will sacrifice themselves to keep me comfortable. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. They end up surrounded by narcissists who need constant validation, addicts who need endless enabling, emotionally immature people who need a parent instead of a partner, and manipulators who need a steady supply of empathy without ever having to reciprocate. The empath's life becomes a collection of one-sided relationships where they give everything and receive crumbs in return. The empath tells themselves they're being kind, compassionate, understanding. They wear their martyrdom like a badge of honor. They take pride in their capacity to tolerate what others cannot. But Jung recognized this pattern as something else entirely. It's self-abandonment masquerading as virtue. The empath isn't actually helping these people. They're enabling dysfunction while slowly dying inside from the effort of pretending everything is fine. The suppressed shadow grows larger and more powerful with each passing year. All that unexpressed anger, all those unmet needs, all those violated boundaries accumulate in the unconscious, like psychological pressure building in a sealed container. The empath starts experiencing symptoms that don't make sense to them or their doctors. Chronic fatigue that no amount of rest can cure. Mysterious illnesses that medical tests can't explain. Depression that seems to come from nowhere. Anxiety that permeates everything. Their body is screaming what their mind refuses to acknowledge. You're dying from self-abandonment. You're being slowly killed by your own compassion. You've given away so much of yourself that there's almost nothing left. But they keep going. They keep performing. They keep sacrificing, because the alternative is too terrifying to consider. If they stop being useful, will anyone love them? If they start setting boundaries, will everyone leave? If they express their real feelings, will they destroy all their relationships? The real crisis comes when the survival mechanism finally stops working. Something happens that forces the empath to confront what they've been running from their entire lives. Usually, it's a betrayal by someone they completely trusted. The spouse who was cheating the whole time they were playing the perfect supportive partner. The best friend who was using them for money and connections while talking behind their back. The family member who turns on them viciously the moment they try to set even the smallest boundary. This betrayal hits differently than normal disappointment. It triggers what Jung called the clarity event. Suddenly, the empath can see with devastating precision everything they've been ignoring for years, or even decades. They realize they saw the red flags all along, but talked themselves out of their own perceptions. They recognize they've been gaslit not just by others, but by themselves. The signs were always there. The manipulation was never subtle. The lies were obvious. But the empath's survival mechanism required them to deny what they were seeing, because acknowledging the truth would have meant having to act on it, and acting on it would have meant potentially losing the relationship, and losing the relationship would have meant facing the terror of being alone with themselves. The most painful part isn't the betrayal itself, it's the recognition that they betrayed themselves first. They knew something was wrong, and they stayed anyway. They felt the manipulation, and they made excuses for it. They sensed the danger, and they silenced their own intuition to keep the peace. They chose the comfort of familiar dysfunction over the uncertainty of honoring their own truth. This is the moment Jung identified as the beginning of the return, the moment when the cost of staying abandoned becomes greater than the fear of coming home to yourself, the moment when survival through self-abandonment is no longer survivable, the moment when something inside you finally says enough, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, clear knowing that you cannot continue like this. That you would rather face the unknown of authenticity than spend one more day betraying yourself to maintain relationships that require your silence. What happens next terrifies everyone around the empath because they don't recognize this person anymore. The empath doesn't cry, doesn't plead, doesn't try to fix things. They don't beg for another chance or ask what they did wrong. They become unnaturally calm. There's a stillness to them that others find deeply unsettling. Jung called this the integration of the shadow. After years of suppressing their authentic responses, the empath finally stops performing. They stop cushioning reality to make it more palatable for others. They stop managing everyone else's emotions. They stop taking responsibility for other people's reactions to basic truth. They start speaking truth without cushioning it, not with cruelty, but with precision. They reveal everything they've observed, catalogued, and silently endured. They expose the patterns they pretended not to see. They name the dysfunction they spent years enabling. They set boundaries without apology or explanation. They say no without offering 17 reasons why. The people who benefited from the empath's self-abandonment experience this as a complete personality change. Where did the understanding person go? Why are they being so cold? Why won't they just forgive and move on like they always did before? Why are they acting like this isn't who they are? But the empath hasn't become someone else. They've stopped being someone else. They're returning to the self they abandoned to survive. And that self has no interest in continuing patterns that require self-betrayal to maintain. Jung documented this transformation as permanent in the empaths who consciously worked with it. They didn't cycle back into people-pleasing after a few months. They didn't apologize for their newfound boundaries when people pushed back. They didn't second-guess their perceptions anymore when someone tried to convince them they were crazy. Something fundamental had shifted that couldn't be undone. Once you've tasted authenticity after decades of performing, you can't pretend anymore. Once you've experienced the relief of honoring your own truth, you can't go back to silencing it. Once you've felt the power of trusting your own perceptions, you can't unknow what you know. The shadow integration brings the empath face to face with qualities they've spent their entire lives rejecting. Their capacity for anger, their right to prioritize themselves, their permission to disappoint people, their ability to walk away from relationships that require self-betrayal to maintain, their willingness to be misunderstood rather than diminish themselves for comfort. These aren't negative qualities. They're essential aspects of psychological wholeness that the empath sacrificed for attachment security. The anger they suppressed wasn't some dark, evil force. It was their authentic response to violation, their psyche's way of saying this is not okay. The selfishness they avoided wasn't narcissism. It was healthy self-respect, the natural human right to prioritize their own needs sometimes. The disappointment they feared causing wasn't proof of their cruelty. It was just the natural consequence of having boundaries, of being a separate person with separate needs. The discomfort others felt around their truth wasn't something they needed to fix. It was information about who could handle their authenticity and who couldn't. As the empath integrates these rejected aspects, they become what Jung called psychologically complete. They still have their extraordinary sensitivity and emotional intelligence. They didn't lose their gifts during the transformation. But now they have something else too. The strength to protect what they perceive. The wisdom to know when their compassion is being exploited. The clarity to recognize manipulation the moment it begins. The courage to disappoint people who need them to stay small. This integrated empath becomes something their former self could never imagine, still deeply caring, but strategically protective of where that care flows. Still emotionally intelligent, but no longer absorbed by other people's emotional states. Still sensitive, but no longer apologizing for their sensitivity or dimming it to make others comfortable. Still kind, but no longer confusing kindness with self-sacrifice. The return to self doesn't happen all at once. Jung identified specific stages that empaths move through during this process. Understanding these stages helps you recognize where you are and what's coming next. First comes recognition. The empath learns to identify when they're absorbing psychological material that isn't their own. They practice distinguishing between their authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. This sounds simple, but it's actually extraordinarily difficult for someone who has spent decades merging with others. They start asking themselves questions they've never asked before. Is this anxiety mine, or did I absorb it from my mother's phone call? Is this guilt authentic, or is it a response to someone else's manipulation? Is this exhaustion from my actual life, or am I carrying someone else's emotional weight? Do I actually want to go to this event, or am I just afraid of disappointing someone? This requires regular solitude, time spent in complete isolation, where absorbed material can settle so the empath can recognize their own authentic psychological voice. Many empaths resist this stage because they've spent their entire lives deriving worth from their usefulness to others. Solitude forces them to confront the question they've been avoiding their whole lives. Who am I when I'm not performing a function for someone else? The answer is often initially terrifying. Nothing. Nobody. Empty. But if they sit with that emptiness long enough, something extraordinary happens. The authentic self begins to emerge. Quietly at first. Small preferences, genuine desires, real opinions. The voice gets stronger the more space they give it. The second stage is shadow integration. The empath must face and accept every quality they've rejected in themselves. This means acknowledging their capacity for the very behaviors they judge most harshly in others. Their potential for selfishness, manipulation, cruelty, deception. Not to act on these capacities, but to accept that they exist as possibilities within them. Jung observed that people who see others' shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. The more you deny your own capacity for deception, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing it in others. The more you reject your own anger, the more you'll attract angry people into your life. The more you refuse to acknowledge your own needs, the more you'll judge people who prioritize themselves. Shadow integration means recognizing you contain every human quality you observe in other people. You have the capacity for everything you judge. You are not exempt from the full range of human darkness simply because you've been kind. This doesn't make you bad. It makes you complete. It makes you human. The third stage is conscious participation. The integrated empath learns to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing their individual identity. They develop what Jung called psychological containers. the ability to hold others' unconscious contents temporarily while maintaining awareness that these contents are not their own. This stage represents the highest development of the empathic gift. The empath can still feel everything and perceive everything, but they're no longer flooded or consumed by it. They've learned to turn their sensitivity on and off consciously. They choose when to open to others and when to close their energetic boundaries. They decide who deserves access to their emotional intelligence and who doesn't. The return brings practical life changes that reflect the internal transformation. The empath leaves abusive relationships with strategic precision, not with drama, not with long explanations, just clean, decisive action. They cut contact with toxic family members without emotional drama or guilt. They stop attending events that drain them. They rebuild their lives on their own terms according to their own values. They become what Jung called selectively empathetic, still deeply caring but strategically protective of where that care flows. They understand now that their compassion is a limited resource that must be protected. That giving it to people who exploit it isn't virtue, it's self-harm. That saying no to the wrong people is how you say yes to yourself. Their presence affects others differently now. People who once walked all over them suddenly feel nervous around them. They can't explain why. The empath isn't aggressive or cruel. They're not punishing anyone. But everyone can sense that something fundamental has changed. The doormat is gone. The emotional dumping ground is closed. The person who absorbed everything without complaint has boundaries now. Jung identified this as the predator's instinct. Manipulative people can sense when their usual tactics won't work. They avoid integrated empaths instinctively, the same way predators avoid prey that might fight back. The empath doesn't have to announce their transformation or prove their strength. It radiates from them in ways that bypass conscious perception and speak directly to the unconscious. The most beautiful part of this transformation is that the empath doesn't lose their capacity for love. They just learn to love themselves as fiercely as they once loved others. They discover that boundaries aren't walls that keep people out. They're definitions of self that allow genuine intimacy to develop with people who can meet them as equals. The integrated empath attracts different people now. The takers disappear and authentic people emerge. Relationships become reciprocal for the first time. The empath discovers what it feels like to be truly seen and valued for who they are, not just for what they provide. They experience the profound relief of being loved without having to earn it through service. Jung's documentation of this process offers hope to every empath who feels lost in the role they've been playing. The self you abandoned to survive didn't disappear. It's been waiting in your shadow this entire time, waiting for the moment when it would be safe enough to emerge, waiting for you to become strong enough to protect it, waiting for you to finally choose yourself. And the moment you're ready to stop performing and start returning, that abandoned self will be there to meet you, not with judgment for how long you stayed lost, but with relief that you finally found your way home. The return isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you always were beneath the conditioning. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you sacrificed for attachment security. It's about integrating your light and shadow into a complete person who can feel everything without being destroyed by it. You spent years learning to survive by abandoning yourself. Now it's time to learn how to thrive by coming home. The person you've been searching for outside yourself has been inside you all along. And Jung's work proves that the return to that authentic self isn't just possible. It's the most important psychological work you'll ever do. The empath's return is not a betrayal of who you were. It's a homecoming to who you've always been. And once you cross that threshold, you'll wonder how you survived so long in exile from yourself. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension. If you like this one, you'll love this next video.